We technically call it a race, but it's really an allotted time to work through our demons. If we only cared about fitness, we'd run a 5K or a 10K. But we do it to be alone on the trail against a backdrop of immense human support. In our heads, we are the myth of the cowboy, but the truth is that we are far from it. We are completely alone with our fitness, lost in our minds, and at the same time, we're surrounded by the most supportive community in sports. It's just me in the mountains and my will, juxtaposed against the reality that we can't do it without others. In 2019, Jeremy Cox set out on the Buffalo 100 on Antelope Island, only to finish dead last, making us wonder, how does anyone keep going after the finish line has been torn down?
Island is sort of it's this island that's close to the Wasatch and the Ochre Mountains, but it's like neither of them. It has no trees. It's this really unforgiving, really sort of brutal terrain. If you're gonna try and hike it, there's no respite. You're just sort of exposed the whole time. It really is a face only a mother could love. And the primary draw maybe is the buffalo, but even maybe more than that, it's just that you've probably never seen anything like it. There's Prairie Peak in the middle of it that's pretty high, but it's not like the highest thing around. It's just that there's nothing like it. It kind of feels like you step on another planet. The oddity of it is fascinating, and if you drill down deep into its history and the buffalo that are here and all of that, it's extremely satisfying, even though on the surface it's sort of odd. Jeremy would be bleeding. His legs could be broken. He's the type that will not stop.
He's a stubborn motherfucker who finishes what he starts.
Like when you think of someone who's, you know, thoughtful, nice, and a little off-center, that's kind of Jeremy.
But he is the grittiest motherfucker you will ever come across. When you're moving, not only will he be there to help, but he's the one who shows up with donuts. He'll do it not just for people he knows well, he'll do this sort of stuff for strangers. And I think that that's why this is such a fascinating story to me, because he's always the helper. He wants to help, he's got a bleeding heart.
A lot of times, he's volunteering at aid stations on, you know, races, Wasatch, whether it's Lambs or Big Mountain. I mean, he'll get you everything. Like just last weekend, he's rubbing, you know, lotion on my neck for me, and I'm just like, oh, baby. I mean, he totally knows what he's doing.
But in those moments, he's the one that has to just sort of like humbly receive from us, from his crew, from his team, from his pacers.
And I mean, he'll do anything for his runners, whether it's a front rub in the back room or a back rub in the front room, you know, he'll take care of you. Dude, good to see you, man.
I got my buffalo for DNF to celebrate my DNF. He got his to celebrate his DFL. Yeah.
There's a scene in Beowulf at the end where him and his cousin are fighting the dragon, this dragon. And
okay, one last move. Sorry.
The cousin gets killed. Beowulf ends up dying shortly thereafter, but yeah, so out of high school, I didn't really come from a family that had lots of money to go to college, so I was looking for places that were free, and the Naval Academy was free. I ended up getting an appointment from my congressman to go to the Naval Academy, and I was there for 3 years, and it was a ton of fun. After about 3 years, I just really was struggling to handle the politics of, you know, being an officer, being that close to DC. The military wasn't quite as perfect as I thought it'd be. The Naval Academy is one of these interesting things because any other college, you would just say I transferred to some other college. But if you go to a service academy, you quit. That's always been in the back of my head, that I quit this, you know, amazing institution. There's been a million things I've wanted to quit. I mean, being married gets really hard at times. Being a PhD student gets really hard at times. Running hundreds gets really hard. I mean, everything is going to get hard at some point. And if you don't think about quitting, you're probably not thinking about what you're doing seriously.
The Buffalo 100 is a race put on by Jim Skaggs on Antelope Island, just outside Salt Lake City. Go through Davis County, head across the causeway, and it feels like you've gone to another planet. It's a couple decades old, no corporate hype. It's really built around the love of trail running and built around just gritty runners who want to go prove something to themselves and to the people around them. It's not the type of race that you can really show up super prepared for unless you're really good at running and training through the Utah winter, because the race happens in March.
March on the island is, you know, cold, but usually pretty clear, maybe a little soggy.
I've DNF'd this 100-miler, I've finished the 50-miler. It's brutal to happen that early in the year, but it's a race that has brought out some of the best names kind of in the region around here. The record holder for the course is none other than Speed Goat, old Carl Meltzer, and a lot of really iconic names in the sport. When they come here, they're not stars. They come here because it's a low-key, no corporate hype sort of race. That it's really a race that's for the love of trail running, and that's why people come and do it, because they come out here and get to spend time with other people like them.
There's very little vegetation in the way of trees. It's just sage, grass, rock, and buffalo. You may see an antelope or a coyote, but mostly it's these big buffalo herds. When I came into the 50-mile mark at Buffalo, you remember what I said to you? I said, I need 2 beers and then we need to get out of here. And as soon as we walked out, I said, the reason we got out so quick is because I wanted to quit.
When you're crewing for somebody racing a distance like 100-miler or 200, a long race like that, you're constantly doing math. The 2019 course had 6 aid stations. After the start, Jeremy ran to Elephant Head in the backcountry. Then over to the overlook where he grabbed a sticker to put on his bib to prove he did it. Then back to Elephant Head, made a loop, and then Elephant Head again. From there, runners went back to the start area, ran along the fence toward a turnaround on the west shore. Now on the Mountain View side of the course, he ran to Lower Frary, and then the long but scenic trail to the ranch. Then back to Lower Frary and toward the north part of the island and Bridger Bay Aid and around back to the start. That's 50 miles. Now he has to do it all again.
I remember mainly pacing him along the Mountain View Trail. I had him on a certain pace so he'd finish, you know, in the cutoff. And the last segment that I handed him off to, whoever was pacing, I'm like, look, you need to keep him on this pace.
I was gonna do the last 12 miles with him, and you said, hey, can you go meet him at 18? Because I'm not sure that Jason can keep pacing him after that point, so.
I mean, it was a, you know, pretty terrible cold night.
Man, the amount of times I think I said, Jeremy, you gotta keep moving, is in the thousands probably of keep going. I got a good rundown from Jason of how that process was going, and Jeremy was responding pretty well to it. We were trying to keep those 20-ish minute paces.
So a cutoff is set times at certain checkpoints in the race where runners need to get to. If they don't get there by a certain time, then they have to stop them because they may or may not make it to the finish line in time. So if you miss a cutoff, you've got to call it. You're out of the race.
If he doesn't make the cutoff now, I'm gonna be really pissed at those people for not keeping him, because I've felt like we were like so structured and methodical about a relatively slow to moderate pace. It was like he had time to finish by a while. I was on pins and needles, hoping, watching, like, is he gonna make it? And at some point I'm like, oh no, they've screwed up. They haven't kept him on pace.
I was starting to stress for all the work he had put in and realizing I was, at that point, probably a little in over my head in terms of pacing. That was the first time I'd paced anybody. We rolled into that aid station. He was slowing down. That's when we talked to one of the aid station workers and, you know, said, hey, are we too late? What's the cutoff time again? And that's when the aid station worker at that aid station said, yeah, there's no cutoff time here. It was just at the last aid station.
The hidden story is that the last cutoff is the Frary aid station. There's no more cutoffs after that.
Oh, okay.
So you got me through the last cutoff.
Okay. Aid stations are generally out in the middle of nowhere, where volunteers drive rarely driven roads and carry lots of goods that runners may or may not need. They have drinks and some random food and other stuff like sunscreen or Vaseline and first aid supplies. It's the goal of these saints to get runners in and out as quickly as possible and on their way to accomplishing their goals.
I could see from Jeremy there is this like well of confidence that he was going to finish this race, right? In my mind, I was like, you bastard, why would you say something like that? Because we lost a little bit of that motivation to keep moving at a reasonable pace. There was still the confidence from Jeremy of, by hook or by crook, I'm finishing this race. The last maybe 9-10 miles, we were doing 30-minute per mile paces, which if you've ever tried to walk that slow, it's a really slow pace. He would have me stop and he'd get just right behind me and he'd say, okay, and I'd start walking and he would follow my footsteps and he would just look at my feet and follow my feet.
It's pretty rough. You're stepping over rocks, so you know, on tired legs, even though it's flat, it's not a ton of fun.
You took him all the way to the finish line?
Yeah.
How long and how many miles? How many miles total?
Yeah, so I was with him for 17 miles and it was about 7 hours it took us. Close to 7 hours it took us to get to the finish line.
You know, he's not moving real quick, not burning the oil the same way he was a minute ago. So meanwhile, you know, runners are coming through.
The DFL for the 50-miler was Carl Tippett's, and so he comes up next to me at some point. It was kind of good to see him, you know, familiar face. And he turns to me and he goes, well, good news is there's nowhere to go but the finish line from here. And then he takes off. I knew I was in dead last, not just for the 100-miler, but for everybody.
Joey, whose body was in great shape, had a full night's rest, was pretty casual. So we were texting a lot, and I just kept trying to get updates from Joey.
So it was getting close to the cutoff time for the whole race. The other last runner comes through. And they come over and they're asking us again, they're like, you know, he's out there on the course. Does he feel like he's gonna do it? At this point, we're like, look, there's only one way he's getting out of here. He's gotta meet us here. We're his ride, so he's gotta run through here eventually. And there's talk about, you know, does it count? Does it matter if it counts? Is there a belt buckle? Is there maybe a mug? Like, hey, good job, here's a mug.
So you come around, what, Bridger Bay?
Yeah.
And you see it.
Yep.
Well, what is it at this point? Is there a finish line?
No, there's no finish line.
They start folding up chairs, rolling up tents. The big inflatable finish line, they've got to take it down.
They had packed up and left, and he was still out there.
Was there a point that you knew that the finish line was torn down?
When I saw it. When I came out of the last aid station, you go around this hill in the northwest corner of the island.
We're just waiting, and I'm sitting there staring at this corner. And eventually it's just a truck and me and Emily and one or two people from the race are still there.
I knew I wanted to quit. I knew I wasn't feeling motivated to run. I just kept sort of grinding.
Yeah, eventually they came moving through, and I think we tried as hard as we could to make a big deal, but 3 people wasn't a huge cheering section.
So Joey texted, he said, we did it, DFL.
It's like an ungodly hour. He posts to our like running group chat, just finished Buffalo 100, and I'm just like, good God.
Like he just finished, like he just now finished.
I don't know how I finished, to be honest.
Everything had been torn down. There was about 2 cars in the parking lot. His family was one of those. Matt Bergstrom was the other one. Jim was there to give him a high five. He was packing up the last of his stuff in his car, and he said, hey, sorry I ran out of belt buckles. We'll have to mail one to you.
And I'm thinking, there's no way he kept going even when the finish line was torn down.
And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm like, holy shit, why did he finish?
I said, wow, how long were you out with him? 7 hours. We left ranch at 12:30, left Lower Frary at 2:40. We were keeping around 19-minute miles until about 2 miles past Lower. Then his calf started cramping and kept up the rest of the time and severely killed our timing. I was trying to keep us under 30-minute miles. He was hurting bad.
I think most people would have quit.
I don't think that I would have that much motivation or commitment to getting it done after they pack everything up and take off, and there's no one there at the end for you. You're just seeing the remnants of the race that was.
And I said, dang, so crazy. Few people in the world of ultras would have kept going. I would not have. He always is a lesson in head strength for me. Joey said his head was strong, man. A few moments of doubt, I think, but easily overcame. Super inspiring.
Would you have finished?
No way. No way. It was actually really inspiring. You didn't have the big pomp and circumstance of the finish line with music blaring and the arch that you're running through and a bunch of people cheering you on, but in some ways it was more satisfying.
I'm curious as to what the fuck was going through his mind to stay out as long as he did to finish the race.
I knew how many people had given up time for me to be there. So like, you were there, Matt Bergstrom was there, Joey was coming the next day. I'd forgotten until today. Jason reminded me. He'd actually paced me Friday night and Saturday. I'd completely forgotten the first half of the race. But there are just so many people that like show up and encourage you. And I mean, on the one hand, it sort of sucks because I know I'm taking away a full Saturday from guys like Joey, and they could be with their family. On the other, I don't want him to have wasted it.
Jeremy had to get his buckle in the mail because there was nothing left there but a guy in his truck, and Emily had the van all ready for Jeremy with a mattress out in case he wanted to lay down all the way home.
If it was just me alone on that island, I don't know that I'd have made it 40 miles.
Did you get the belt buckle that Jim sent it to you?
Yep, and it's the only 100-mile belt buckle I've never worn. I've worn Zions and I wear Wasatch all the time, but that one I've never worn. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, that race, probably more than any other, kind of broke me a little.
What about it?
I think it was one where somewhere around 40 miles, I decided I didn't want to finish the race.
Watching the elites as someone who's aspiring to run 100 miles, actually I think is not effective. I think it's hearing stories of Jeremy finishing dead last that's most inspiring, because the average person out there who's going to endeavor to do 100 miles is more like Jeremy than they are Jim Walmsley or Courtney Dalwalter.
In a marathon, when things go to hell, they just go to hell, and that's where you end. In an ultra, they can go to hell and you can actually come back, and then they can go to hell again, then you can come back.
All those little demons pop up that just tell you should quit, and I think a lot of people quit, and that's the beauty of the sport, because some days those demons win and other days those demons lose, and Jeremy beat the demons that day.
Every yellow leaf on a sturdy oak reminds me of how seasons end. Even the strongest tree may not survive the cold, and 100 years of life could end with no one to say goodbye. And all these things keep on changing, except the setting of the setting sun. Still everything I want finds ways to fade out, and all I ask is that something could last long enough to let me love. Helplessly for the phone, just a few spins closer The seasons change and a sea change calls. A million leaves to take their place, just to do it all over again. And all these things keep on changing, except the setting of the setting sun. Still everything I want finds ways to fade out. And all I ask is that something could last long enough to let me love.
You may think running 100 miles sucks, and it does. Stay hard.